If you think you have the answers, then you don't ask the questions, right? And I think good entrepreneurs, no matter their experience, are always full of questions. I try and just be filled with that sense of wonder and curiosity because it almost always leads to kind of that next iteration.
Hi, I'm Jason Harris, and you're listening to Soul and Science. Fast forward your marketing mind in about 20 minutes. Today, we're very excited because we're talking with Nate Checketts, co-founder and CEO of Rhone, which is a premium men's performance lifestyle company that he founded in 2014. But Nate's entrepreneurial spirit has been with him since childhood. He founded 4 companies before the age of 30, including one of the first iPhone apps, Mangia, whose patents were later acquired by the SF-49ers. In this episode, you'll learn the power of questions. Curiosity and wonder are powerful. Good entrepreneurs, no matter their experience, are always full of questions. You'll learn about data, using data to find out what crucial subsection is missing in your market, and then you do your best to fill that gap. You'll also learn that product quality is number one for new customers. It's more important than great branding. Gone are the days where you can have great advertising and a mediocre product. You'll also learn to spend the right way. When you build your brand the right way, performance spend gets much more effective over time. All right, let's dive right in with Nate. Well, I feel like up until I was 30, I was just at bars and trying to make a living and meet girls. That's kind of what I was doing.
Well, this is what happens when you get married at 22 and expect your first when you're 25. You don't have a choice. You better figure life out quick.
I like that. You started early.
Yeah.
Family life early and entrepreneur life early. Was that something that you always knew at a young age you were going to go that route?
No, I mean, definitely not. Like, I think I was always a bit of an entrepreneur without really knowing that's what it was called. I was always up to something, right? Like, for example, when I visited my grandparents, they used to have a home near a golf course. I would go over into the golf course. I would dive into the ponds and lakes and scoop up golf balls and then sell them back to the golfers. And then when I was 15, I started a summer camp in my parents' backyard without telling them. But then all of a sudden kids started showing up and I was charging for it. I was like, I'd buy candy at wholesale and sell it to kids in school at retail. And, so I was always just kind of up to something and not always like from a business perspective, but I just had all these ideas that I wanted to try. And as I got older and maybe a little bit more mature, I thought, okay, I've got to buckle down. I've got to do something serious. In college, I was studying finance. If you grow up in the Northeast, it feels like you kind of have to study finance. And then I realized I'm like, oh, wow, I do not want to work in Excel all day because that's pretty much all you do. And so then I tried consulting and then I realized, oh, you'd only work in PowerPoint all day if you're a consultant. My desire started to be, could I find a job that allows me to work in more than one Microsoft Office product?
That's
awesome.
If
I can do that, that's a win. And while I was in between my junior and senior year of college, I came up with an idea for, kind of my first real business, which was Mangia, mobile software technology that allowed you to order food and merchandise from your seats inside sporting stadiums and then have it delivered to your seat or that you could pick it up from a pickup window. And we were super early in kind of the mobile software space. We were one of the first iPhone applications to launch after the iPhone launched in 2007. We created a couple of patents around natural language processing. And I learned so much more doing that and getting kind of my hands dirty that, and you probably know this, when you start a business, it almost makes you unemployable anywhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because
I know what you mean.
It's such a roller coaster of emotions. There's the highest highs and the lowest lows. And then when you go to a corporate job, you're like, oh, well, nothing I do really matters that much.
It's kind of flat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also, people can be entrepreneurial, but not be entrepreneurs. And they could find themselves in an organization in product development or starting new things to help the business, but they aren't wired for all those highs and lows, stress about making payroll and legal issues. And there's a lot to it.
There's no question. And you said this, and I think I realized this when I was starting. Oh, wait, there's more than one way to do this. I just always had thought an entrepreneur was somebody who effectively dropped out of college or ran away from a job and started a company, not knowing what they were doing and figured it out along the way. And I quickly realized some of the best entrepreneurs actually developed real expertise, real experience, saw there was a better way of doing something, and then launched a business. I always envied those people because I generally have been the former of those two archetypes of, just figuring it out along the way. And I would say if you want to save yourself some real pain, it's better to start with some experience. It's just a balance because a lot of disruption tends to come from outside of industries, because when you get into any one industry, you realize how hard it is. And sometimes it's our ignorance that convinces us to start something in the first place, and that momentum leads to success. But if you knew how hard it was, you'd never even get started in the first place.
What you're pointing out is that you can come into an industry that does it one way, but you come in with that naivete. That naivete is power because you're figuring out a way to do it that might not be the status quo, and it might be a better mousetrap.
If you think you have the answers, then you don't ask the questions, right? And I think good entrepreneurs, no matter their experience, are always full of questions. And you're this way. Like every time I talk to you, you always ask me, like, no wonder you're a good podcast host, because you ask really thoughtful questions. I try and remind myself of that because the older I get, sometimes I notice the less questions I'm asking. And hopefully that's due to knowledge acquisition. But I really try and fight that urge. I try and just be filled with that sense of wonder and curiosity, because it almost always leads to kind of that next iteration.
What do you think the hardest thing about running your business is for you and your personality?
That's it. See, you ask really good questions. I think the hardest thing for me is that I really genuinely love people. I always have. I care really deeply about people, and starting a business that is growing and changing, it's very different to run $1 million business than a $10 million business, than a $50 million business, than a $500 million business. They're all very different. And not that those are the logical jumping points, but as you're building a team, as you're building a culture that is scaling rapidly, you are going to find people that can go from A to Z. And those people are amazing, but they're really rare. And you're going to find some people that are A to C and C to F and, et cetera. And what's really difficult for me is I tend to believe in people past the point of their abilities oftentimes. And so that's been, that's a lesson I'm still learning, is how to hire the right people for the right moment and be okay that that might not be forever.
What do you think makes you successful, and what do you think you're particularly very good at?
Yeah, truthfully, I do not think I'm very good at most things. Probably to some degree, what makes me a good entrepreneur is I'm okay at a lot of different things. But I think my weakness is also my strength. It's just that I care so much. And because I care, I will not give up. I am the kind of person that is just going to figure it out, grind it out, and not quit until I do. That's just kind of the way I'm built.
So resilience.
Unrealistic, stupid determination.
Yeah. When you were building Rhone and you started it, what was missing in the industry? How did you find a way in?
Well, this is a perfect example of, not coming from the industry and believing it was easier. Everybody was oh, wow, apparel, retail, it's such a hard business. And I was can't be that hard, right? You make some things, you sell some things. It's just, I oversimplified it in my mind. But I did landscape out the industry. And at the time when we started, what we found is if you were to just kind of look at two key data points, meaning price point and percentage of sales to men in the activewear space, we found that there were two big clusters. The first big cluster is what we call the Nike cluster. A little bit more than half of their sales were to men on the gender spectrum. And they were within plus or minus 5% on a price index versus every other big box retailer out there. Nike, Reebok, Adidas, Under Armour, et cetera. Then the second cluster is what we call the Lulu cluster, which was 10 to 15%, less than 15% of their sales were to men, 85+% were to women, and they generally were at a 40% price premium to the Nikes of the world. So you see these two clusters on a graph, and what immediately stands out is, okay, where is the 85+% male brand that is at a 40% price premium to these other brands and makes really, really high quality product with a focus on direct distribution? And we couldn't find a single brand that fit that category. Again, this is in kind of the men's performance space. And the only brands we could find were like triathlon brands or like
really niche brands.
Yeah, really niche. There was a cycling brand that still exists called Rafa, which skewed more male than female, but there just wasn't anything that was kind of this general, what we call performance lifestyle. And you layered on all these macro trends. So men were dressing more and more casual increasingly every year. Active was the fastest growing category within clothing. We put this kind of macro trend of what we call the connected self, as people were wearing things like Jawbone and Fitbit and Apple Watches. They were starting to understand more about their body, and therefore they were selecting a uniform that matched a more active lifestyle. Oh, and then premiumization of everything was also happening. And not to mention a shift towards more direct-to-consumer online e-com. So there was a lot of tailwinds for us to go into this category that we really believed in. So it wasn't completely blind, but I completely underestimated just how hard of a business it is, which again, had I known, I would have never started.
Well, now you're here. When you say it's hard, is it hard based on competition, based on margin, based on supply?
Yeah, the hardest thing I think in the apparel business is inventory, managing inventory, thinking through and planning for inventory, especially over the last 2.5 years. I mean, just the shifts in what consumers demand and appetite over the last 2.5, 3 years with the pandemic has been wild. In 2019, we launched our commuter shirt, which is a beautiful button-down knit dress shirt. So most dress shirts are made out of a woven or a cotton. They're very stiff. They have no stretch in them, and they're itchy. They're not comfortable. The commuter shirt is a knit fabric, so it's a different construction altogether. It's super stretchy. You never need to take it to the dry cleaners. You just throw it in the wash and tumble dry low, and it's good as new. Anti-odor. It's just an amazing shirt. If you haven't tried it, like, I'll send you one. It's the most amazing dress shirt. And I've worn a lot of dress shirts in my life. So we launched it on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in fall of 2019. And it's a gangbuster. Like, it's going crazy. We're selling more of that than we've ever sold of anything. And so what do you do when that happens? You immediately buy a lot more. But unlike Peloton, they make a bike and they make a treadmill. You know, at one point they made 2 treadmills, but they don't need to carry inventory on each of those SKUs in 5 sizes, multiple colors. So, you know, they're planning demand based on who's going to buy that. We have to say, how many blue size small are we going to sell? And so the complexity of having to get that right and to land that plane, and you know, the other thing about activewear and performance fabric, you have to plan so far in advance. Sometimes we're making inventory decisions 6 to 8 months in advance. So we start selling these shirts, we order a ton of them, and then March 2020 happens, the pandemic hits, and how many dress shirts do you think people are buying? 0. So it's like, that is the hardest thing I think about the apparel business, is just trying to get the trends right, trying to get the planning right. You need a crystal ball, which none of us have. And so you're always going to be wrong. You just want to be as wrong in the right direction as possible.
How do you balance sort of like product attributes in selling versus building the brand? And in what formats, now that you have a pretty big base of audience, you can kind of email them and get them to purchase more. Or if they love the commuter slim fit, they're going to keep buying that particular product. How detailed do you guys get in targeting and kind of finding that? That's two questions, but like targeting and then how you balance brand and product.
It's tricky, right? Because one is more short term and one is more long term. And marketers, in many ways over the last 10 years, have shifted much more into this performance driven mindset that I want to know if I put $1 into a machine that $1.12 is coming out, right? And once I know that, I want to put as many dollars into the machine as possible because I know that $1.12 is coming back. But there are so many issues with that mindset and model because there's all kinds of attribution errors. And in most cases, it's like, you're not getting the $1.12 back right now. You're putting $1 in, you're getting 60 cents back now, and then you're getting 30 cents back later. It's like, it's just not as clean cut. And as a result, all of these maybe more traditional channels where attribution is a bit harder start to get undervalued. And things like brand building tend to get undervalued because we're habituated to getting the data on the performance side that convinces us to spend. And so it's a little bit harder to convince even yourself or your team and your budget to say, hey, let's go throw $500,000 at this idea that, yeah, we think is going to work, but we don't know. And we probably won't be able to directly attribute to, over the course of a year. That's a really hard proposition to sell.
Yeah.
And so we have some formulas and benchmarks that we use, but my mentality is it's all about the brand all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that I have to surround myself with really good, strong people who are like, okay, that doesn't always work. It's a little bit of a black box. It's hard to prove. And the reality is you need both. But I'm convinced that when you do the brand building stuff right, your performance spend gets much, much more effective over time. And so I think most companies today don't spend enough on the brand building side of the business and spend too much on this formulaic, habituated, data-centric model of let me just make myself feel better and having the comfort of the data shown back to me.
If you're building a great brand, the stronger your brand is, your cost is going to go down on performance because your brand's carrying the day. So you really have to do both, but you have to balance the longer term investment with the short term.
I also think that if you go back 30 years, you could have had a really mediocre to poor product and a good brand and good advertising and have a really great business. I think good product is table stakes now because if it's not good, eventually people are going to know, and it's not hard to find that out. And then, great brand, great product is kind of what we think about, and then great storytelling. But the storytelling sometimes is more of that performance stuff.
I don't know if you had other retail stores before, but I remember I was checking out Hudson Yards and I saw your store there and I was like, holy shit, man, these guys they made it. Like, look at this space and look at the stories they're telling in this space. And this is really hot prime real estate. How did you make that jump from D2C to retail? And how do you think about physical retail kind of propping up really an e-commerce brand? How do you think about those two things? And is retail really important, or is it just almost like part of your ad campaign to get people to shop online?
Yeah, I mean, my thinking on that has really evolved over the last few years, but it's funny to hear your perspective on it. And it's not different than I think a lot of others' perspectives. We now have a store on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, in addition to the Hudson Yards store. And I feel like until that store opened, my mom didn't believe we had a real business. It was like, wait, you have a store on Fifth Avenue? That was what added legitimacy for her. And, that store is really great. It's our flagship. It's successful, but it doesn't come anywhere close to our e-com revenue as a total pie. But I used to think that, especially when we started, retail's dead or it's dying and it's on its way to being dead. And then then what I realized is there were kind of two opposing forces. One, you had a couple of things happen on the digital space. It was becoming much more expensive with time and more opaque on how to acquire new customers digitally. So digital as a channel relative to physical brick and mortar became less desirable on a relative basis. Like it got worse over time. Meanwhile, on the retail side, landlords started getting more open-minded, more flexible on their lease terms, more willing to sign short-term deals or deals with outs clauses, et cetera. And technology improved to enable location-based selling to not have inventory be stuck there. It used to be when you would send inventory out to a store, that inventory was basically there until it got sold, or like you had to send it to an outlet store or something like that. Now, with the way technology works, we can do buy online, ship from store, buy in store, ship from online. So these basically became mini distribution centers, and we can, with tech, enable our retail teams to be busy and working even when they're not helping a customer. And so the value prop became much, much closer to digital. And now in my mind, it exceeds it. I think it's cheaper to acquire customers in a retail environment in the right store with the right lease than it is online. And
that's crazy to hear you say that, though.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy to hear those words coming out of my mouth. But at some point, that's going to shift again. We know that these tech companies are feeling the pinch. They've laid off thousands and thousands of workers, Meta, Google, et cetera. But it's just the reality of digital tools have become much more expensive to acquire new customers. Because of data and privacy laws, it's harder to do lookalike audiences than maybe it used to be. And I think as a business, we're just going to have to get smarter and smarter about measurement, attribution, and knowing where to spend time, energy, and effort.
When you think about the brand, and obviously you have this idea of the pursuit of progress, how do you think about that brand in talking to consumers and what it represents? Also, how you do it internally so that everyone feels like they're marching behind the same kind of vision?
Yeah, I think this is something I struggle with, because most customers, if I try and get myself in the mindset of the customer, they don't care what our mission is. They don't care whether or not we care a lot about men's wellness and mental health, and we spend a lot of time there and energy and dollars on it. I think most customers, even though they say they care, ultimately they're like, I need a pair of workout shorts and I want them to be really good and I want them to have these features. If they like the shorts and they're like, this is really cool. Oh, wait, the brand's really interesting and really cool. It's going to drive further loyalty and repeat rate in the future. And so for new customers in particular, we tend to lead with product. And we tend to say, this is the best performance dress shirt, or these are the greatest work pants you've ever had, because that's what the new customer mindset is. For existing customers, it's a lot about layering in that brand stuff to drive loyalty and consistency and, kind of further purchasing in the future. And certainly internally, we want our team to be proud of the products, but we want them far more to be proud of the company and the brand that they work for. And so there's definitely some hierarchy of message there, but it just depends on the audience.
Moving on a little bit from Rhone, you're also chairman of the board for Beyond Type 1. What is that organization and what's the cause for it?
Yeah. Well, when I was 25, I was starting my first company, and my wife and I decided we didn't need health insurance. And I, like 2 months later, broke the first bone I've ever broken in my body, which was I broke my ankle playing basketball. 3 months later, this was not planned. My wife became pregnant. And then 2 months after that, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It just kind of all happened in this 6 to 8 month period. For the first time in my life, I didn't have health insurance, and it was terrifying. And I started to learn more about this chronic illness that I would have presumably for the rest of my life. And one of the first things I realized is this is going to be incredibly expensive, especially with a pre-existing condition. I can't get back onto health insurance. And I have a company that doesn't offer health insurance. So I don't know how I'm going to figure this out. A vial of insulin for somebody who's not insured at that time was, I think, $280. It's skyrocketed up to almost $400 today. If you go to Canada, that same vial costs $20 to $25.
Oh my God.
But it's just a bit of a statement on, kind of where we are. There has been some positive advances here. Lilly just announced that they are lowering the cost of all of their insulin by 75% or 70% and capping the cost of a vial of insulin at $35. But it's something that I became passionate about is living with this disease because it's incredibly expensive. It's overwhelming. And Beyond Type 1 was founded by a group of people, but the most well-known is Nick Jonas, who was diagnosed with the disease when I think he was 12 or 13. And so we're trying to do as much as we can to bring access to the uninsured of our country and education to those who deal with a very complicated disease and advocacy for the disease as a whole, which we think ultimately will lead to a cure in my lifetime. I really believe that.
I love that. Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you always either say to your team or say to yourself that you kind of fall back on?
Well, our company mission statement is forever forward. And part of what we mean by that isn't that everything is forward progress. Sometimes it feels like you're taking steps backwards, but the goal is to kind of keep your mindset focused on continued progression. And the other thing that I always say is make no small plans. And I like to dream big and to think big, and so I say that to my kids all the time. It's okay to dream. It's okay to think really big and to imagine. And I feel like we're really lucky and fortunate to live in a time where it feels like anything is possible, and in a country and space where we have the opportunity to chase those dreams.
That's awesome. I love that. I used to, every time I put my kids to bed, I would whisper in their ear, "You're going to do great things in this life." And when they got to about 12, they didn't want me to do it anymore. They're like, "Yeah, I got it, Dad. I had 12 years of that every night. Like, I got the message,
Yeah, they start to anticipate it. It's like, my oldest is 14 now. It's embarrassing. He knows everything I'm going to say before I say it.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a habit that you've sort of employed that has made an outsized impact on your life?
I'm a big believer in habits, but the chief among them is kind of gratitude expression. And so I try and end and start the day with gratitude. I used to always write it down, and now it's become so much more automatic. But I try and think about what's the last thought I put into my mind before I fall asleep, and what's the first thought I have when I wake up. And you have to be intentional about it and conscious, because otherwise, it's usually like something you're busy with or something you're worried about or preoccupied with. But what has always been true for me, no matter how hard life has become or whatever trial I'm going through, there's always something I can be positive about and be grateful for. And it might sound ignorant or cliche to some, but for me, it's been a real big blessing in my mindset to just kind of try and fall asleep to something I'm grateful for and wake up and immediately find something to point to.
I do that through inconsistent journaling, but I think making it a habit and one thought in the morning and one thought at night makes it doable.
To take it a step further is to try and envision that, because it's one thing to be like, I'm grateful for my family, but to be really specific of, I'm really grateful that I got to have those 5 minutes with my son before he went to bed tonight and what he shared with me, and relive that moment, because you're almost giving yourself those happiness vibes again. And I think that just, ultimately plays an impact on how you feel.
Where do you do your most creative work? Or if you're stuck on a supply issue or opening a new store, or you can't quite get that new SKU right and you have to solve a problem, do you have a place that you go that helps you crack those tough problems as a leader?
I have to get out of the office, and usually it's being outside for me. And whether that's running or just sitting outside, or I generally like to move, but like walks, runs outside is like the key for innovation for me. And it's funny because some of my coworkers are used to that. I'll like be on a run and I'll call them and I'm like, I just had this idea. They're like, oh no, Nate's running
for a run. Is there an outstanding life goal that you want to accomplish, either personally or professionally?
Yeah, I have a lot to help my kids graduate and feel good about themselves and love themselves as they go out into the world.
In the spirit of gratitude, I'm grateful for your time and for your knowledge and for you to share that with all of our listeners. And I'm sure they're grateful as well. If they could talk to you directly, they'd be high-fiving you and saying thanks as well. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time. And we can't wait for everyone to hear this episode. It's going to be a killer one.
All right. Thanks.
Soul and Science is a Mechanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, Tyler Nielsen, Emma Swanson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.